Flight attendant laughs at student's cheap ticket, freezes when he shows his black card. Hello and welcome, everyone. Today we have a gripping story that starts innocently enough with a student boarding a routine flight on a tight budget. But sometimes appearances are deceptive and fate can change in an instant. From a dismissive laugh at a so-called cheap ticket to the wide-eyed shock of seeing a rare, elite black card, this story will keep you on the edge of your seat. We'll follow a tale of unexpected discoveries, dramatic reversals, and swift karma that spares no one in its path. Sit back, get comfortable, and let this jaw-dropping saga unfold before your very eyes. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. Donovan Wells stood in the winding security line at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, hands fidgeting with the frayed strap of his duffel bag. The overhead lights cast a dull glow on the chaotic sea of travelers rushing to catch flights. As a second-year engineering student, Donovan was used to budget, living, college textbooks, shared apartments, part-time jobs, but none of that dampened the excitement rippling through him today. He was on his way to a national robotics competition in Los Angeles, a massive opportunity for networking and showcasing his latest project. His phone buzzed a message from Mia, his project partner. She'd boarded a flight earlier that morning, courtesy of her father's frequent flyer miles. Donovan, on the other hand, had cobbled together funds from tutoring gigs and campus lab hours to secure the cheapest economy seat he could find on Delta Airlines. A minor detail, he told himself, if it got him to California in one piece. He pulled out his phone to confirm the gate. There's 17. Departure was an hour away. Deciding to grab something light, Donovan darted toward a small coffee shop on his way to the gate. He saw business travelers, families on vacation, and a few frantic souls hurrying to not miss last call for boarding. Even in the bustle, Donovan felt a sense of pride. He'd saved enough for this trip on his own, and soon he'd be showcasing something he'd poured months of labor into a specialized robot arm that performed delicate tasks with surprising dexterity. By the time Donovan approached gate 17, the waiting area was already starting to crowd with travelers. A few uniformed flight attendants milled around the podium, scanning boarding passes and assisting passengers. Donovan spotted a brisk, sharp-featured woman whose name tag read Keira. She wore the crisp navy blue Delta uniform with polished shoes that looked like they'd never seen a scuff. Her posture radiated a practiced authority, and every time a passenger approached, she offered a professional, if somewhat cool, greeting. Donovan's cheap ticket came with no seat assignment. He tried to pick a seat online, but every selection soared beyond his budget. The email confirmation suggested he would receive his seat assignment at the gate. As he stepped up, Keira's eyes flickered over him. Donovan noticed her nose wrinkle slightly at his well-worn sneakers and faded campus hoodie. "Ticket?" she said, in a tone that wavered between formality and impatience. Donovan offered a polite nod, handing over the paper printout of his itinerary. Keira typed in a few details on the computer, frowning as she scanned the available seats. "We are extremely full today," she said, tapping her nails against the keyboard. "You purchased a basic economy ticket, correct?" "Yes, ma'am," Donovan said, keeping his voice level. "I didn't need much. Just a seat to get me there." She issued a short laugh, more of a scoff. "Well, you'll definitely be squeezed back there." She tore off a small slip of paper from the printer and handed it over. 39E, middle seat. "Good luck finding overhead space if you brought a big carry-on." Donovan forced a smile, ignoring the sting in her tone. "Thank you," he replied simply, refusing to let her attitude ruin his day. Donovan's humble appearance belied something others rarely suspected. He was the beneficiary of a trust fund left behind by a grandfather he barely knew. The terms stated Donovan could access the trust only if he remained enrolled in school and maintained a certain GPA. With that came an unexpected perk, an American Express Centurion card, also known as the Black Card, linked to an account created for emergency use and certain educational expenses. He almost never used it. The idea of relying on someone else's wealth, especially from a grandfather who had never been part of his life, grated against his pride. But Donovan knew the card was in his wallet, just in case. He stuck to his own earnings, paying for daily expenses with the part-time jobs he juggled. Even his flight, he insisted on purchasing himself. To him, the card was both a safety net and a reminder, a life lesson that money could help you, but only if you took responsibility for your own path first. Boarding began. Donovan waited in the final group, surrounded by fellow budget travelers and some late arrivals. As he scanned his boarding pass, he caught sight of Keira again at the aircraft door. She was greeting first-class and business passengers with measured politeness, all while ignoring Donovan and the cluster of economy passengers trailing him. He found his seat near the back, a cramped space between a frazzled mother with a restless toddler and an older man scrolling intently on his phone. The overhead bin was already overflowing, so Donovan wedged his duffel bag under the seat in front of him. It pressed against his feet, but he reminded himself it was only a few hours. Not long after he buckled up, an announcement came over the intercom, instructing passengers to settle in and ensure tray tables were up. Donovan exhaled, ready to relax. Despite the tension with the flight attendant and the less-than-ideal seat, he was just glad to be on his way. Moments later, Keira swept through the aisle, performing a final compliance check. She stopped abruptly at Donovan's row, her gaze flicking over him and the mother with the toddler. "You need to put that bag overhead," she said, pointing to the mother's oversized tote, which was half protruding into the aisle. The mother explained that there was no overhead space left. Keira offered a terse, unsympathetic shrug and repeated her directive. The older gentleman in the aisle seat stepped in, helping push the bag in a vacant corner. 2 rows up. Meanwhile, Donovan quietly sank into his seat, hoping to avoid attracting Keira's attention. Unfortunately, her eyes fell on him anyway, as if searching for a reason to reprimand him too. When she found none, she sniffed and moved on. As the plane taxied onto the runway, Donovan tried to distract himself with a NASA documentary on the seatback screen. His mind drifted to the upcoming competition in Los Angeles and the demonstration he'd planned for his robotic arm. He pictured the lines of bright booths, each team showing off months, if not years of innovation. He was determined to shine. Suddenly, the toddler next to him burst into a crying fit. The mother looked frazzled, rummaging for a pacifier, a bottle, anything to soothe her child. Donovan offered a gentle smile, rummaging in his own bag for a small stuffed creature. A leftover from a campus fundraiser, he handed it over. The child quieted, distracted by the toy's bright colors. The mother gave him a grateful nod, eyes shining with relief. No more than 10 minutes later, the older gentleman in the aisle seat, whom Donovan later learned was named Mr. Gardner, took out his laptop. But his device wouldn't power on despite repeated attempts. Donovan noticed and leaned over. "I'm pretty good with tech stuff. Mind if I take a look?" he offered. A quick check revealed a loose battery connection. Donovan popped it back into place, and Mr. Gardner's laptop whirred back to life. "Thank you, son," Mr. Gardner said, sounding genuinely appreciative. He and the mother exchanged nods of approval at Donovan's helpfulness, and Donovan felt some of the tension from the morning slip away. About an hour into the flight, the seatbelt sign flicked on. A few passengers stirred, wondering about turbulence. From the corner of his eye, Donovan saw Keira briskly making her way forward, clutching something in her hand, perhaps a phone or a radio. Then, an announcement. The flight attendants were asked to suspend snack and beverage service. They'd be hitting a pocket of severe turbulence in the next few minutes, according to the pilot's weather updates. A mild hush fell over the cabin. Some passengers tightened their seatbelts. The overhead lights dimmed slightly. Donovan steadied himself, trying to keep calm. He'd flown before, but turbulence always made him uneasy. True to the pilot's warning, the plane began to jolt in mild increments, shaking water cups and rocking overhead luggage. A few gasps rippled through the rows. Then came the bigger jolt, like the plane had been seized by a giant hand. It forced Donovan back into his seat with such force that he saw the toddler's pacifier jolt from the child's mouth and roll onto the floor. A wail ensued. Mr. Gardner braced himself, whispering a prayer under his breath. Donovan tried to breathe steadily, ignoring the lurch in his stomach. The flight rocked precariously for another few minutes before stabilizing once more. With the turbulence receding, the captain's voice returned, apologizing for the rough ride and giving the all-clear for the crew to resume service. There was a collective sigh of relief. Donovan loosened his white-knuckled grip on the armrests. Keira passed by, taking stock of the cabin. She paused at Donovan's row again. Noticing that the mother's tray table had dropped slightly due to the jolts, Keira pressed it back into place with an exasperated sigh. Then her gaze fell on Donovan's jacket, which had slipped halfway into the aisle. She nudged it with her foot, pushing it roughly under his seat. "I can pick that up," Donovan offered quickly, but she gave him a curt glance that clearly conveyed annoyance. "You should be more mindful," she said in a low tone. "People in these cheap seats never know how to stow their belongings properly." Donovan felt a flash of anger. He was about to respond, but Mr. Gardner placed a hand gently on his arm, as if to say, "Don't stoop to that level." Donovan swallowed his retort. The flight attendant moved on, her posture rigid as she made her way forward to help with the food and drink cart. Eventually, the beverage service started. Another flight attendant, a kinder-faced woman named Belinda, began handing out drinks to the rows near Donovan. He asked for water. Belinda offered an extra cookie for the toddler, turning the mother's expression from exhaustion to gratitude. Then Donovan heard a slight commotion from the front. Keira's sharp voice carried through the aisles, though the words were indiscernible. Passengers craned their necks. Belinda exchanged an awkward glance with Donovan's row and hurriedly continued distributing drinks. It wasn't long before Keira herself appeared, marching down the aisle with an expression that spelled trouble. She stopped in front of Donovan's row, eyes locking on him with a mix of exasperation and suspicion. "You," she said, pointing at Donovan, "did you leave your seat earlier without permission while the seatbelt sign was lit?" Donovan's jaw dropped. "No, I've been here the whole time." He gestured to Mr. Gardner and the mother. Both immediately shook their heads, confirming Donovan hadn't moved. Keira paused, lips pressed into a thin line. "Someone told me a passenger back here went to the bathroom while the seatbelt sign was on." "It wasn't me," Donovan said calmly, though his heart pounded. He hated confrontations. She exhaled sharply. "Right." Without apologizing, she stepped back and scanned the nearby rows. "If I find out who..." She let the threat hang and marched off again, leaving behind a tense silence. When Keira disappeared behind the curtain separating the galley area, Mr. Gardner leaned toward Donovan, shaking his head. "I've flown a lot, son, and it's not often you see an attendant target someone like that. You okay?" "Yeah," Donovan managed. "Just on edge," the mother quietly murmured. "She seems to be in a bad mood." "Don't let it get to you," Donovan nodded. "It's just a few hours." And then we're on the ground. I'll be fine. Yet the resentment simmered inside him. He was doing nobody any harm, and it felt like Keira was fixated on making him feel unwelcome. Donovan tried to refocus on the documentary he'd been watching, but it was difficult to concentrate. About halfway through the flight, Donovan decided to stretch his legs. The seatbelt sign was off, so he carefully slid out past Mr. Gardner and made his way toward the rear galley to grab a cup of water. He found Belinda there, organizing cups and napkins. She smiled as he approached. "How can I help you?" "Just water, please," Donovan said, offering a small grin. She poured him a cup. While he sipped, Belinda eyed him curiously. "I saw the little exchange earlier," she said softly, leaning closer so passengers in the last rows wouldn't overhear. "I'm sorry if Keira came off as harsh. She's under a lot of pressure these days." Donovan shrugged, not wanting to cause friction among the crew. "I get it. Everyone has tough days." Belinda exhaled. "Yeah, but that doesn't excuse unprofessional behavior. I just wanted you to know not everyone on the crew feels that way. If you need anything, let me know." He nodded gratefully, then finished his water and returned to his seat. The mother with the toddler was dozing, and Mr. Gardner appeared to be deep into a novel. Donovan quietly settled in, thinking how Belinda's kindness contrasted so starkly with Keira's hostility. The flight progressed without major issues for the next hour. Donovan nearly forgot about Keira's attitude when he became absorbed in reading some last-minute notes for his robotics presentation. Then an overhead announcement from the cockpit broke his focus. There was a medical issue in the forward cabin, and the flight crew was requesting if any passenger was a medical professional. A murmur of concern rippled through the plane. Mr. Gardner peered up from his book. "Hope it's nothing serious," he muttered. Keira hurried down the aisle again, eyes scanning for anyone who might have stepped forward to help. She paused near Donovan's row, speaking in hushed urgency to her handheld radio. Donovan only caught fragments. "Passenger, shortness of breath, requesting doctor." She sped to the back of the plane, presumably in search of the medical kit, nearly bumping Donovan's shoulder on the way. By now, many of the passengers felt on edge. Several stood up slightly in their seats to see what was happening. Belinda motioned for everyone to remain calm and seated. 15 minutes later, the overhead speaker chimed again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We have a passenger who is stable but in need of evaluation by paramedics upon landing. We'll be giving priority to that upon arrival at LAX. We appreciate your cooperation." The tension dialed down, though everyone remained quietly concerned. Donovan felt relief knowing there was no need for an emergency diversion. The entire flight was now under a hush, each passenger counting the minutes to landing. Suddenly, there was a flurry of activity up in the business class section. A tall man in a crisp suit stepped out of row 10, gesturing for Keira and Belinda. He had a stern face and an air of authority, the kind Donovan associated with high-ranking airline officials. Indeed, the man turned out to be a Delta corporate manager named Nathan Palmer, flying on official business. Within moments, he approached Donovan's row with Keira and Belinda in tow. Donovan's heart pounded, not understanding why. Mr. Gardner and the mother looked equally baffled. Nathan Palmer spoke quietly. "There's been an issue with seat assignments, specifically with a passenger named Donovan Wells." He checked a small tablet in his hands. Donovan raised his hand slightly. "That's me." Nathan nodded, then shot Keira a glance. "It seems there was a note on your reservation. You're on our preferred traveler list, courtesy of a partnership with your school's scholarship program, but you didn't receive your correct seat assignment." Keira blinked, color draining from her cheeks. Clearly, she had missed something important when boarding. I didn't see anything like that," she stammered. Nathan scrolled on his tablet. "It appears You were booked under a special code that normally grants an automatic upgrade if space is available. It's a courtesy extended to students traveling for academic competitions. Today, we did have space in the forward cabin, but it seems Mr. Wells was not notified. Donovan felt a small swirl of amazement and embarrassment. I wasn't aware, he admitted. I bought the cheapest ticket. Didn't expect or request an upgrade. Nathan nodded. Sometimes it's triggered automatically, especially if your institution has some partnership with Delta. We regret the oversight. Then he gestured to Donovan. Please gather your belongings. There's a seat in business class for you if you'd like to move. Even as Donovan processed the surprise, Keira's expression told its own story. She stared at Donovan as though he'd just shattered all her assumptions. For a moment, her mouth opened and closed wordlessly. This was the same student with the frayed hoodie, the cheap sneakers, the basic economy seat that she had so openly scoffed at. The same young man she had singled out for scolding. She snapped to attention as Nathan turned to her. Keira, could you please assist Mr. Wells with moving to the seat? He's definitely earned a more comfortable ride for the remainder of this trip. Keira forced a professional smile, but her voice trembled slightly. Of course, sir. Donovan stood, gathering his duffel from under the seat. His rowmates offered him supportive smiles. He hesitated. He didn't want to leave them behind, especially after bonding through the flight's ups and downs. But Mr. Gardner waved him on. Go on, you deserve a decent seat for at least a part of this flight, he teased. Donovan offered him a fist bump, then turned to the mother. Your toddler might enjoy these, he said softly, handing over the rest of the stuffed trinkets he'd collected for the robotics competition giveaways. She nodded gratefully. As he made his way up the aisle, Donovan couldn't help but notice how uncomfortable Keira looked, forced to guide him to a plush seat in business class. Even more so when she realized that seat was right next to none other than Nathan Palmer. The manager quickly struck up conversation. So, Donovan, are you traveling for a competition? Donovan nodded. Yes, sir. A robotics competition in Los Angeles. I'm a second-year engineering student. Nathan grinned. Excellent. Delta loves supporting bright young minds. Donovan dropped into the seat, marveling at the extra legroom. He placed his duffel overhead without a struggle for space, and he sat back, feeling the comfortable recline for the first time. As he settled in, he realized he'd misplaced his phone charger. He rummaged through his bag, then patted his pockets. No luck. Perhaps it slipped out in his original seat. Keira offered a stiff, "Is everything all right, sir?" The honorific felt forced on her lips. "I'm missing my phone charger," Donovan replied. He started to rise. "I'll go back and—" Nathan interrupted. "No need. We have extras here, or if you want to purchase one, we sell them on board." Donovan paused, scanning around. Then, in a moment of unthinking reflex, he pulled out his wallet. In it sat the American Express Centurion card, black surface reflecting the overhead lights. He used it occasionally to buy research materials or lab components in emergencies, just as the trust allowed. He started to hand it to Keira. She froze. That was not a standard credit card. The black metallic glint and distinctive design of the Centurion card were unmistakable. Keira's eyes widened. The hush that fell between them was palpable. She took the card gingerly, as though it might burn her fingertips. Donovan, suddenly self-conscious, cleared his throat. "I'd like to buy a charger, if you have one." Nathan's eyebrows shot up, impressed. He'd obviously spotted the black card, but he maintained composure. "Yes, of course." "Keira, can you retrieve the onboard electronics kit for Mr. Wells?" Keira nodded stiffly and practically sprinted to the galley, card in hand. Donovan glanced at Nathan, who only offered a knowing smile. Keira returned moments later with a shrink-wrapped charger. She hesitated, eyes lowered, as she handed back Donovan's card and a receipt to sign. My apologies, Mr. Wells, she managed, her tone subdued. For all the confusion earlier, Donovan offered a polite nod. It's fine, thank you. She pivoted to return to her duties, but she paused. Guilt flickered across her features. Let me know if you need anything else, she said quietly. Then she hurried off, leaving Donovan to sense the immediate karma swirling in the air. In a single flash, her derisive assumptions had been demolished. Once Keira was gone, Nathan leaned over, curiosity dancing in his eyes. I have to ask, where does a second-year student get a Centurion card? Donovan rubbed the back of his neck. It's complicated. An inheritance, sort of. My grandfather set up a trust, but I don't usually rely on it. I only brought it as a safety net. Nathan nodded sympathetically. I see. Well, there's nothing wrong with a little help when you need it, although your humility speaks volumes. Donovan smiled faintly. Honestly, I'm just grateful to be going to this competition. Everything else is icing on the cake. Nathan studied him for a moment. I admire that. In fact, when we land, if you've got time, I'd love to hear more about your robotics project. Delta invests in tech all the time, and it might be interesting to connect you with some folks. Donovan's eyes lit up. That would be amazing. Near the front, Donovan spotted Belinda ushering paramedics down the aisle. They were checking on the passenger who'd had a health scare earlier. Keira lingered off to the side, not her usual brisk self. Donovan felt a twinge of empathy. Perhaps she realized that a single bad day, a single snap judgment, could unravel her professionalism in front of superiors. He turned back to find Mr. Gardner standing at the partition between business class and economy, rummaging in the overhead bin for his luggage. The older man spotted Donovan and offered a small wave. Donovan waved back, relieved to see he had safely reached the final minutes of the flight without issue. Soon, the plane descended through the cloud cover into Los Angeles. The captain announced an on-time arrival, with paramedics ready at the gate to assist the passenger in distress. Donovan felt the excitement of approaching his destination anew. He stowed his tray table, powered down his devices, and straightened in his seat as the runway lights grew visible through the window. The landing was smooth, and once the seatbelt sign dinged off, Donovan rose. Passengers were instructed to remain seated to let the paramedics attend to the ill passenger first. Keira, looking more collected now, assisted in clearing the aisle. For a fleeting moment, her gaze met Donovan's. She offered a half-smile, a silent peace offering. Donovan dipped his head in acknowledgement. Eventually, the cabin door opened, and paramedics came aboard. Donovan watched them wheel the medical patient away, guided by Belinda. Keira stayed behind, conferring quietly with Nathan. From the glimpses Donovan caught, it looked tense. Her posture was stiff, her eyes downcast. Nathan seemed to be explaining some company policy or code of conduct. Keira nodded reluctantly, as though receiving a reprimand. Donovan almost felt sorry for her. Immediate karma, indeed. But the scene shifted when Nathan glanced Donovan's way and motioned him over. Mr. Wells, this is purely internal housekeeping, but I thought you might appreciate knowing that we take complaints seriously. Are you planning to file one? Donovan looked at Keira, who appeared pale. He recalled how she'd singled him out, laughed at his cheap ticket, and made his early flight experience needlessly tense. But he also remembered how rattled she'd looked after discovering who he really was. The humiliating apology, the black card revelation, the oversight with his special seat assignment. And, in her own way, she'd tried to make amends before the flight ended. No, he said gently. I don't want her to lose her job. We all have bad days. Keira shot him a grateful look, though she immediately tried to mask it with a more professional mien. Nathan nodded, appeased. All right, I'll note that. But I hope this experience hasn't soured your perspective on Delta. Donovan managed a small smile. I'll keep flying Delta. Just maybe not in basic economy next time. Nathan chuckled, patting Donovan on the shoulder. Understood. Once in the terminal, Donovan paused near an arrivals board. The throngs of LAX travelers surged around him. He spotted Mia in the distance, waving furiously with a sign that read "Go Team." Donovan beamed. Balancing his duffel, he wove through the crowd to greet her. Mia ruffled his hair. "Took you long enough." Then her eyes flicked past his shoulder. "Business class? Did you do a last-minute upgrade or something?" Donovan laughed. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." They headed toward baggage claim. While they walked, Donovan gave Mia the short version, the flight attendant who ridiculed his cheap ticket, the corporate manager stepping in, the seat upgrade, and the stunned reaction when he revealed his black card. Mia gasped and cackled at all the right moments. "You really should have hammered her with a complaint," Mia pointed out. "That's so unprofessional," Donovan shrugged. "I think she's learned her lesson. Besides, I'm more focused on us crushing this robotics competition." Mia grinned wide. "Now, that's the spirit." A few days later, after the competition's preliminary rounds, Donovan found himself with a flurry of new contacts. Teams admired the dexterity of his prototype. Professors offered him congratulatory handshakes. Mia teased him that they could be the next great innovators. Toward the end of the event, a well-dressed representative from Delta approached. He introduced himself as Alan Chen, part of the Corporate Relations Department. "I was told by my colleague, Nathan Palmer, to check out your booth if you had the time," he said. "He's told me you're quite the rising star." Donovan felt a surge of excitement. "Nathan said that?" Alan nodded. "Yes, and we'd like to learn more about how your robotics might apply to certain airline operations. Baggage handling, mechanical inspection, there's a lot of synergy possible. Would you be interested in discussing an internship or demonstration at Delta's corporate offices?" Donovan exchanged a stunned glance with Mia. She practically jumped in glee. "That would be fantastic," Donovan managed. That night, Donovan relaxed in his hotel room, the lights of downtown Los Angeles twinkling below. He scrolled through the day's photos on his phone, recalling how anxious he'd been boarding that plane in Atlanta, bracing for a cramped, uncomfortable flight. Yet in a remarkable turn of events, a rude encounter led to an upgrade and, more importantly, a new connection that could change his future. He recognized the irony. The flight attendant who initially made him feel small had, in a roundabout way, paved the path for this opportunity. Without the conflict, Nathan might never have noticed Donovan or discovered his robotics project. Life, Donovan thought, had a funny way of orchestrating unexpected blessings from misfortune. He pulled out the American Express Centurion card from his wallet, placing it on the nightstand, a silent reminder of his complicated inheritance. He couldn't help but feel grateful that it had been the right tool at the right moment, revealing that sometimes a door is opened simply by showing you belong in a place people never expected to see you. On the final morning before flying home, Donovan and Mia were checking into their return flight. Also with Delta, he half expected to see Keira, but she wasn't on duty. Instead, Belinda was working the gate, her face lighting up in recognition as they approached. "Donovan," she exclaimed. "Hey, how did your presentation go?" "It went great," he answered. "We placed top 5 and I might have an internship with Delta soon." Belinda clapped her hands. "That's amazing. I'm so happy for you." Mia nudged him. "Ask about seat upgrades," she teased. Belinda laughed. "I can see if there's anything available," she offered genuinely. After a few keystrokes, she smiled. "Actually, we have 2 seats in comfort, plus with extra legroom if you want them no charge." Donovan hesitated, remembering how insistent he'd been about paying his own way. But Mia gave him a playful nudge. "Don't be silly. Accept." All right, he agreed. Belinda printed out new boarding passes. As she handed them over, she lowered her voice. By the way, I heard about your flight in. Keira, she's on probation for that incident. It's not permanent, but the airline took it seriously. She paused. I hope it won't stop you from flying with us again. Donovan shook his head. Not at all. On the flight home, Donovan reflected on what had happened. He thought of the turbulence, both literal and figurative, that shaped his experience in just a few short hours. From condescending laughter to an upgrade in comfort, from being singled out to forging a potential corporate partnership. A wave of gratitude warmed him. As the plane lifted off from LAX, he glanced out the window at the city, disappearing below. His mind replayed the moment he pulled out the black card, how Keira's expression had changed from disdain to stunned realization. Perhaps it was shallow that a piece of plastic could shift perceptions so drastically, but it highlighted a bigger truth. You never know who you're dealing with, and kindness should never hinge on appearances. By the time he landed back in Atlanta, Donovan knew he'd carry these lessons forward. Self-worth came from his actions, his accomplishments, not from the hush that fell when someone spotted an elite credit card. Yet he also learned that, sometimes, letting the world see what you're capable of, money or talent, could open unexpected doors. Even if that door is a seat upgrade at 35,000 feet. Thank you for following this unforgettable journey, where a single misplaced assumption led to shocking revelations and a twist of fate. We witnessed how a student on a tight budget, armed with hidden means and enormous potential, defied expectations and even earned a life-changing professional connection. This story shows us that respect and kindness are always the best policy, because you never know the story behind someone's worn sneakers or last row seat. If you enjoyed this tale of poetic justice and immediate karma, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more riveting stories. Until next time, safe travels and stay inspired.